Hello viewers at home and those of you watching online, thank you once again for tuning into this show. My name is Chef Andy, your regular host, and today we are going to be making something very local, something most of you may not be accustomed to, but I'm going to be giving you a nice beautiful tip on ways of making it a little more interesting. So very simply, we're going to begin by introducing the ingredients before us, giving you a nice beautiful breakdown of what to expect. So from the very front, we've got some potatoes. So this is just one medium-sized potato, washed and chopped into cubes about 1 inch in size. You're also going to require about a tablespoon of salt for seasoning, 1 stock cube, 1 medium-sized carrot cut into some very nice sized cubes. You'll also require some chopped parsley, a bit of some cumin powder, about a teaspoon, and a teaspoon of black pepper powder to season. You're also going to require 1 medium-sized onion and 1 large tomato. You'll also need to reserve some cubed tomatoes there and some cubed red onion, which you're going to be using for your guacamole. You're also going to be incorporating some peas. You'll also require 1 lemon to actually season with as well, about half a large avocado that's already been cut in half. You're also going to require 1 cup of some cooked maize and beans mix. So I'm going to give you a hint of how to do that later. You're also going to require a bit of water, which you're going to be using to stew your mixture. And last but not least, some oil to cook with. But we're going to take a short break now. And before we do come back, we're going to give you this chance to freshen up, grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes. And we will see you after the short break. See you in a little while. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just catching up with the show, we were just introducing the ingredients before us. As I mentioned in the beginning part of the segment, we were actually introducing the name of the dish, which is a very simple maize and beans mix. The local name that we use here in Kenya is Githeri, but we are going to be giving it a nice beautiful twist today by incorporating some different techniques to give you a broader understanding of some different tips and techniques you can actually improve this very simple dish and make it a little nicer to consume and even more palatable to the eyes. So very simply, very important, begin by heating up a big pot. So I'm using a regular pot for this. You can actually incorporate any heavy based pot for this particular dish. I will recommend, if you're going to be thinking of cooking this on a shallow pan, it may not actually turn out really well for 2 reasons. You may not be able to get the nice beautiful consistency of the stewy mixture, and it may actually take you a little longer. So very importantly, always make sure to have a pot with a bit of height. It will actually give you quite a bit of an advantage. Now to begin, I'm going to begin by introducing the Githeri. So this we actually did a little earlier in the show, so I'm going to give you some very simple hints. Begin the process by getting some red kidney beans, of course, or nyayo beans, which are not cooked. Proceed to soak those in some water overnight. Allow those to actually soak really well. Remember, this will always give you an advantage and allow for them to cook a little faster. Same thing for the maize. You can soak that anywhere between 2 to 3 hours before cooking. Mix everything together in a nice beautiful ratio of 1:1. So be sure to get about a cup of beans to a cup of maize. That should give you a nice beautiful ratio, and it will actually look beautiful in color. Second thing you need to remember is you can actually cook that in a pressure cooker. Should take you anywhere between 40 to 45 minutes. If you're going to be cooking it on a regular pot, it may take you a little longer, but to be sure, you should be able to actually press the bean as soon as it's cooked. So it should actually mash really easily on your fingertips, but it should not actually break completely. So be sure to actually watch for overcooking your beans. Now, to begin the process, we are going to start off very, very simply by chopping up one red onion. So proceed to chop that fine. Be sure to always also go around the root end, and be sure to also minimize on waste, and proceed to do the same for the second piece. So simple as that. Next, proceed to add some oil to your pot. Once you get a nice beautiful smoke coming through the top there, proceed to add your onions. Now, using a wooden spoon, proceed to mix that together in your pot. And now, of course, very, very importantly, always a good tip to actually fragrance your dish. So we're going to be using some powdered cumin for that. Proceed to add that to your pot. We're also going to be adding our stock cube a little early. Remember, this actually allows for good caramelizing of the mixture. So proceed to allow that cumin to just blend really nicely with your onions in your pot, and proceed to mix completely right up until your stock cube is completely dissolved. And proceed to grab your tomato. Take the stem end off and proceed to cut that into wedges, and turn that sideways and proceed to cut into some 1/4 inch dices. And do the same for the other 2 wedges. Now proceed to add those to your pot. And at this stage, you can actually turn your heat a little higher. So begin at medium to actually allow for your flavor, for your aromatics to really blend in well. Also allows for you to avoid burning them and changing the flavor of your dish completely. So proceed to mix that together once more. And remember, one particular good tip about mixing your mixture, especially when it's at this stage, allows for your tomatoes to break down a little faster. And now, just up until your tomatoes start to really just juice, and as soon as you start to notice the skins to start to blister, by blistering, this would actually that point where the heat allows for the tomato skins to start to curl up and the insides to start to mash. Proceed to grab your potatoes and proceed to drain the excess liquid and add that to your pot. Proceed to mix through once more. And you should actually proceed to do so for anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes. Remember, this actually allows for the potatoes to also absorb that beautiful flavor. Now, something also important to mention for this dish. Remember, if you're going to be working with ingredients that you had actually cooked, before the last cooking process, be sure to begin to add those right towards the end of the dish. This will give them time for them to actually blend in with the flavors, allow for them to rehydrate as well, and it will also aid you in allowing your mixture to not overcook. So remember, the maize and beans mixture was already cooked and cooled off. But we do have some peas here that we actually also had cooked, but these are frozen. So this would be a good time to add those in. That should give it also a good allowance for the peas to actually absorb the liquid, absorb the flavors. And at this stage, you should actually start to get a nice, beautiful caramel coming through. Proceed to add a bit of water. And for those of you who actually may have a bit of stock reserved, you can also use some vegetable or some chicken stock for this process. Now simply just mix that through. Now proceed to add a bit more water, making sure to just cover just the tops of the potatoes. And once you have your potatoes completely submerged, allow your mixture to simmer at medium to low heat. And next up, we're also going to be making our guacamole. So very simply proceed to turn your board around. And you can also change knives if you have a separate knife. And very simply, we're going to be using a nice big bowl for this process. So you may actually want to find a nice beautiful container for this. And now very simply, we're going to proceed to grab our avo. So simple as this, just using a sharp knife, just knock it over the seed, turn it sideways, and it'll simply come out. And now, using a spoon, proceed to remove the flesh from the skin. And be sure to also always avoid any black spots in there. Remember, it will carry that same black spot right into your mixture. So if you do have an avo that's particularly colored on the inside, or it has a bit of black spots, proceed to remove those first before scooping in the rest of your mixture. And once done, proceed to discard the rest. And very simply proceed to use a spoon to press your avo through the strainer. And I'm using a metal strainer for this process. You can actually find this at your retail stores, but if you do actually have some plastic ones, it will work very well. But be sure to only use a sieve that is actually reserved to work with food, and not one that you may actually have used to sift maybe any other chemicals or ingredients, because this will actually be poisonous to you or anyone who will consume the dish after this. So proceed to press your avo right through. By this stage, you should have your mixture completely sifted right through the strainer. But very importantly, proceed to grab your spoon and scoop the rest of the mixture at the bottom. And you can proceed to discard your strainer at this stage. Now proceed to add in your medium-sized onion. Remember, this is chopped very finely. And you may also want to proceed to chop your onions as fine as you chop your tomatoes to get a nice beautiful consistency. Now remember, for this stage, the tomatoes were seeded. By seeded, we actually take off the seed part of the tomato, chop the skin part into strips, and chop that a little finer. And that should give you a nice beautiful mixture like that. It should actually give you a nice beautiful cube there. And all you need to do at this stage is proceed to season the small pinch of salt. Season also with a pinch of black pepper powder. And proceed to just squeeze some lemon juice through your fingers. And this should actually also aid you in allowing you to remove the seeds completely. But if you're using imported lemons for this particular process, remember, those may actually not contain any seeds, but always be sure to make sure by passing that mixture through a strainer, if you can't do it by hand. Now proceed to discard the rest. And very simply add in your chopped parsley and proceed to mix everything together. Right, once that's mixed through, you can actually now proceed to allow that to sit in your refrigerator, giving it a bit of time to cool off, and probably take it out a few minutes just before serving. That will actually also allow for the mixture to stay nice and fresh and keep every one of your ingredients nice and crispy. So we're going to slide that in the fridge really shortly. And we're going to come back to our Githeri. So proceed to give that a mix. And by this stage, you should actually have your potatoes nice and tender, your peas actually floating. This is actually a good pointer that they're actually now nicely defrosted, so it means they're actually now nicely starting to cook. And now for the last and final addition, we're going to proceed to add our pre-cooked Githeri mix. Mix that through. And now at this stage, you can allow your mixture to continue simmering at medium heat. Proceed to also continuously mix your mixture once it cooks for everywhere between 4 to 5 minutes. Remember, this will also give you a nice pointer for whether your mixture is starting to cook faster at the bottom, and it also allows for your ingredients to get a nice even cooking by turning them around. But before we get to that stage, we're going to take a very short break, clean up our station. And when you do come back, I'll give you some nice simple pointers on plating, and also share probably with you some of the tips that you may have missed earlier in the show. See you after a very short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've just been finishing off this beautiful Githeri dish. But before we finish that, we will add the last and final ingredient, which is carrots. Remember, this particular technique of incorporating carrots to a stewy meal actually allows for you to get a nice beautiful crunch out of them. It also breaks the monotony of having everything mushy in the whole mixture. So I always like to add my carrots about 5 minutes to the last point of cooking. Of course, very importantly to also do is mix everything together, and always proceed to try and press your carrots into the mixture, making sure that they're completely submerged. That will allow for them to cook a little faster. So we're going to finish off that by seasoning once more very lightly with some salt and some black pepper powder. And we will allow that to just proceed to simmer at low heat for about another 3 minutes until it's finally done. But before we get to the last and final stage, very importantly, remember we had this beautiful guacamole that we made a little earlier. So very simple technique of plating. I like to incorporate this in my plating technique a lot of times. What this does is actually just allows for you to really get a nice beautiful plating technique and presentation. So I'm going to be showing you one very simple tip if you have one of this. Begin by mixing your guacamole first. And once done, proceed to scoop that into the center of your plate. Of course, always pressing down to get a bit of that surface area. and proceed to scoop your guacamole mixture just right up until you get a little bit of circumference over the top. Spread very gently with your spoon, of course pressing down gently to make sure that there is no air pockets. And we can allow that to just sit in the bowl, in the plate very briefly. And now we can now proceed to mix our githeri through. And we can now proceed to plate. So very simply proceed by scooping it little bits at a time and allow that to pour off the sides of the plate. So this is not particularly a technique I would insist for you to do if you're going to be plating for about 10 to 15 people. But if you're trying to just make that lunch dinner very special for you or your loved one, also a very nice simple technique of serving your githeri. Very simple as that, and very simple technique of taking that out for those of you who may actually be wondering how to remove it. Very simply, using your pair of tongs, proceed to grab that lightly off the side, lift very gently, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is my very easy githeri with guacamole. I hope you've had fun with us today, and I hope you're going to be tuning in onto our next episodes where we're going to be bringing you a nice, beautiful difference to a githeri, which is going to be something that most of you may also know. But for now, and until the next episode, I will bid you farewell. Goodbye and see you soon.